Good afternoon, everybody. And as usual, well, I had hoped to continue yesterday or even after my program on the 7th, but no. Here it is the 9th, and we're working on resuming Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1, Section 1, Part 2, Video Commentary. We're on page 13, and maybe as a refresher, our little segue, I can read that. Later, when the group is really established, it should begin to function outwardly. Let me say that, of course, at first, DK held these groups to function in an inward manner and among themselves, and not so much, well, if at all, outwardly for the noticeable benefit of humanity. They were on their way, of course, and since the Seed Group project lasts some 275 years, maybe we will see the continuation of it, depending on the manner in which Master DK intends to carry on. So, repeating here his words, it should begin to function outwardly, and its life should begin to make its presence felt, let me say noticeably, among the human race. Going on then, it should steadily tend to increase the spiritual potency of all groups with which the group members are related. So let us say we can see the expanding benefit of a well-trained group and well-trained group members. So going on then, anyway, his words, it should steadily tend to increase the spiritual potency of all groups with which the group members are related and with which they may be associated. So it's a very, let me say, a very dynamic seed for future good. DK goes on, I refer to all groups which belong to the New Age and are working along spiritual lines. I'll say that some groups obviously will be present in the New Age, and their modus operandi will not necessarily be spiritual. What is spiritual? It tends to bring down higher vibrations into the customary personal field and to improve that field for the benefit of all human beings, really. Anyway, going on, the eventual effect will be along the line of healing the various ills of mankind. And let me say, of course, Master DK is a master healer, not just of physical ills, but of others as well. So these various ills are listed here as physical, mental, psychological, and emotional. Psychological may be a blend of physical and, a blend of mental and emotional. So that has taken us to the end of program 8, just a couple of days ago. And now we begin with program 9 on page 13. And you know, my method is now experimentally much less intrusive. I'm not highlighting everything in different colors and enlarging words so much for various reasons. Hopefully it will promote the flow. So Master DK says in this, for us, new section, which is program 9, there are certain simple but definite rules which should govern the interior spiritual life of neophytes in training for the various stages of discipleship. And let me add, what are we but neophytes in training? We're new to this relatively. Maybe some have been accepted disciples for a few lives, but that's not the majority, I would say. So DK goes on, let me here outline to you my suggestion for this simple and immediate work. And what I'll do here is do my best to mark out at least the beginning of the several suggestions. Well, first of all disciples must practice regular and daily meditation. Now this, I'll say, seems a simple thing, but it is amazing how many of the members of DK's groups, seem to let up as time went on their regular daily practice of meditation. There's all kinds of things they were supposed to do, and a number of them kind of gave up on it and just didn't do those things. So DK going on here, these meditations are each individually suited to the disciple concerned. I'll pause and say what an expert psychology would be required thus to assign individually ray-suited meditations, because he goes on and says, and they vary according to ray, point in evolution, let us say that not every meditation is necessarily pitched to the same degree of development. So they vary according to ray, point in evolution, and the stage of discipleship, which is the immediate objective. Now, some of these can be quite high stages. And it's my impression that the majority of the meditators were chelas in the light, verging upon the possibility of becoming accepted disciples. So repeating then what DK said, these meditations are each individually suited to the disciple concerned and vary according to ray, point in evolution, and the stage of discipleship, which is the immediate objective. Maybe there were some accepted disciples who could have gone on to the stage of chela in the thread, on the thread. I don't know how many could be called candidates for chela in the aura. Maybe some of the most advanced disciples. We might be able to look at Alice Bailey, because she was included in the lists of disciples, and obviously, at least to me, she became a third degree initiate, was very close to DK and to Master KH, and maybe she could have been within the aura, according to what we studied in the series before this, on the 6 stages of discipleship. But anyway, DK tells us these meditations, that is, cannot be given here. And I'll say that, probably because people would start using that which was inappropriate to them and specific for other individuals, and therefore might do themselves damage or harm. So DK goes on, these meditations will be given to you as suggestions for your use and acceptance. Now, let me say that they're not forced upon the chela. DK devises them from his assessment of the need of the particular chela. And maybe we get an idea of how tough a job it was when we consider that a master psychologist, astrologer, rayologist, etc., devised particularly focused meditations for particular chelas, and yet all of that work, all of those exacting assignments didn't quite have the effect that I think he was looking for. So, when you want to raise a group, you want to raise it to its next potentials. And all the individuals within it, you are facing serious project, and a difficult project. I'm sure the disciples were very happy to receive their individual meditations. But the question is, what did they do with them? And were they able to apply what they learned to the general elevation of the group? So, repeating here, these meditations will be given to you as suggestions for your use and acceptance. I'll say that DK was just very careful about appearing to force anything, any practice upon any chela. So he goes on to say, endeavor at some stage in your meditation to link up with me, that is the master, but let this linking up take place after you have worked at and brought about an alignment with your soul. So we see, don't we, that he's giving advice about efficiency, because in a way the master and the soul are working on the same level, at least at this point, on the higher mental plane. So it doesn't do too much good to link up with the master if one is simply in the personality consciousness. Okay, he goes on to say, the reason that it is essential that you link up after alignment is that you can then avoid the glamors and illusions of the astral plane. Let me say, to which still so many of these chelas were subject, as DK has said, and I have repeated and said, they were not perhaps so very different from what we are. And they were still highly susceptible to those misleading astral currents. So anyway, the reason there is so you can then avoid the glamors and illusions of the astral plane, whereon thought forms and masquerading entities, note this please, personalize the teachers and the masters, and do so in their myriads. Well, what does that tell us? That we have perhaps a very good chance of running into counterfeit masters, who are simply thought forms of the wishful thinking of many, many chelas. They're not real at all, and if they are accepted, they can cause a big damage within the group, as did happen in the case of LTSK, whose rays were 3, 6, 5, 1, 3, and IBS, whose rays were 1, 6, 4, 6, 3. Yeah, he had quite a bit of repair work to undertake because of the susceptibility to these myriads of masquerading entities. The disciples in question could not distinguish. And they were led along by a thought form of the Tibetan, from which poured forth, good words of mediocre cheer, something that doesn't sound too desirable to become involved with. So he goes on and says, and also, to your meditation, a short period, or add also to your meditation, a short period wherein you will try and link up with your co-disciples, sending them love, soul force, and help. And we've been reading about how necessary it is to focus the energy of love within the group. And that if all group members did this, somewhere it says, think outwardly in love towards each other. If all members did this, how much more rapidly the training would proceed. Now, DK goes on with other useful suggestions. I don't know, maybe we'll have to wait until he externalizes again before we can follow out suggestions, but we will see what he gives us in the third installment, because I suspect that there will be students chosen with whom he can work. That was his modus operandi in the Alice Bailey section of his 3-part work, Blavatsky, Bailey, and, well, we just don't know, but we must remain alert. So he says here, you would find it useful to keep what might be called a spiritual diary. Then he gets specific about what it is. This does not involve the daily entry of the day's events, and has no relation to the happenings which may concern the personality. I'm recalling that there was a man who he maybe sat at his computer, or maybe it was handwritten, I don't know, but he was determined to record, to make a record of everything that happened to him. Every passing thought, every mood, it was like a detailed list of inner and outer events. I don't know what good could have come of that, and that isn't what DK means by, in any sense of the word. So there is, he says, no relation to the happenings which may concern the personality. And then he says, note this. And in this diary, you should record the following. Now, I wonder how many of us do have a spiritual diary. I know I used to keep something like that, and probably packed away in some kind of storage unit somewhere on Earth, or some 100 and something books that I filled with thoughts. But did they correspond to what Master DK was requesting? Well, maybe not entirely. So anyway, what's to be recorded in this spiritual diary, if it is really to be a spiritual diary of the kind that he is suggesting? And number one, any spiritual experience which may come to you, such as contact with some presence. Let me say we assume at a presence at a higher than usual point of tension, although I suppose if there were something especially negative at a low point of tension, it might be worthwhile to see why it came into our recognition. Anyway, he says, such as contact with some presence, either that of your own soul, which I'll say is a combination of several things. And then he adds the angel of the presence, which is a projection, isn't it, of the solar angel on the Buddhic plane. And then going on, contact with some disciple, which seems to suggest, let me say, telepathy. And eventually, when your life at work and discipline warrant it, contact with one of the masters. Okay, so let's repeat that because I broke it up quite a bit. What's supposed to be in here? In point one, any spiritual experience which may come to you, such as contact with some presence, either that of your soul, the angel of the presence, contact with some disciple, and eventually, when your life and work and discipline warrant it, contact with one of the masters. Now, let me say that some of DK's disciples knew how to contact him. Some had the ability, but didn't know they did, and others just needed to learn how to do this, but mostly in group form, I would say. DK goes on, record this in an impartial way, preserving the scientific attitude, which, let me say, would be keen observation, without bias, without wish, without exaggeration or minimization, with as much exactitude as may be possible. So, repeating this, record this in an impartial way, preserving the scientific attitude and seeking ever a practical explanation before attempting a mystical one. So I'll say that he tried to help his students become realistic, and us too. You know, it's possible to go on a big search for some very unlikely and high cause of an event we experience. Maybe there's a simpler explanation, and such an explanation would have to be eliminated first before what he says here, accepting a mystical one. Now, the following is very interesting. A spirit of agnosticism, that means not knowing exactly, being open to know, but admitting that one does not really know. So repeating then, a spirit of agnosticism, not of atheism, because let me say that those who are Chevas in the light certainly have a view of our planet and solar system, which is at least partially deific. There are all these ever rising strata of beings, and we're not discounting by any means the divine in nature. So again, a spirit of agnosticism, not of atheism, is of real value to the beginner and preserves him from the snares of the world illusion and of lower psychism. Let me say that people buy into phenomena so easily, thinking that it's very special, and forgetting that millions of years ago, such phenomena were the common property of the spiritually undeveloped people of the time, and even the property of certain animals, the psychism of animals. So when one reminds oneself of that, one is not eager to become a psychic in the usual sense anyway. Higher psychism eventually is trained into the person. Just the way the very first person whose instructions were being offered in discipleship, his name was Herbert Adams, and he was a high Rosicrucian director. I believe that was it. What I know of that, of course, is attributable to the work being done by a group of esoteric astrologers and researchers who are digging into the place in the world where the disciples that DK gathered can be found. What place did they occupy in the world? Okay, so any spiritual experience that may come to you, and we've discussed those possibilities. Now, here's another one for your spiritual diary. I am impressed by how carefully we must proceed with our occult training. And of course, it helps or would help to have a relatively young and courageous group. You can't begin the beginning at the end, but opportunity will re-present itself. So, the next one is any illumination which may come to you. You'll know what such a thing is. It lights up a hitherto darkened area, and you can say perhaps, aha, this I did not know, but due to the inner light, now I know it. Any illumination which may come to you, throwing a flood of light upon a problem and revealing the way that you or the group should go. We have inventors, don't we? And we researchers, and we have people who come up with good things for wider progress, for humanity. So many bright ideas have come in. And maybe we know when that moment comes that suddenly things are clarified. I guess an analogy would be Edison's search for the kind of filament he could use in what he was trying to invent, the light bulb. So our life cannot simply be lived at a dead level. There's always going to be the idea that in that light, we shall see light. That is a greater light. In the light that already is, we shall see a still more illumining light. And we know there are different intensities of light, and the greater the intensity, the more likely the revelation of that which has hitherto escaped registration. He goes on to say, any intuition which, corroborated by the reason, and note that, it's got to at least make some sense carries one forward into knowledge and evokes the wisdom of the soul and its registration by the brain via the mind. So maybe an intuition is even a higher form of light. You wonder, I wonder, what degree of intensity of light exists in this universe. How bright can light become? I'm sure right now that we don't have a really good idea about that. There is light that is visible to us, sensorially visible, but there are greater lights that are visible only on the inner planes. And how intense do they become? Well, we're on yet another journey through yet another universe. So we will find out. And then next in the diary, any telepathic happenings between you and your fellow disciples. Remember, he tells us that we are naturally telepathic, and that somehow we just get in our own way and cover up that faculty of telepathy so we don't realize that we really possess it. In the book Telepathy, he talks about various kinds of telepathy, whether it might be solar plexus telepathy, it might be lower mental or higher mental, it might be soul telepathy. We have to study carefully to discriminate the kinds of telepathy that can be operative. So he goes on to say, this telepathic interplay should be cultivated, but it must be most carefully checked and counter-checked. Now, let me say, there's that scientific agnostic attitude, checking every step of the way so we don't get inspired by some fantastical possibility that is not true. So, but it must be, he says, most carefully checked and counter-checked, and the strictest accuracy preserved. Now, I'll say that many of us are in a hurry with regard to our spiritual progress. And taking the time to do the prosaic thing of checking the accuracy of our registrations and disciplining ourselves to check that accuracy might be something distasteful to do because it seems to slow us down. But in fact, it's possible for the imagination to run away with things and lead deeper into glamour and illusion. So the scientific checking and counter-checking, these are very important. And the strictest accuracy must be preserved. So he goes on to say, thus, we shall have the fostering of the spirit of truth, which is the governing principle of all true telepathic communication. And note that sentence. The spirit of truth is the governing principle of all true telepathic communication. And one more sentence here in this section. An ashram functions telepathically when fully and rightly organized. So already, let me say that signs will appear in groups that are becoming members of an ashram. Maybe not the full thing, but eventually with full telepathic functioning. My friends, I was called away for a little while, but you can never be called away for more than 40 minutes because then the program just stops. Anyway, the last thing that we said was that an ashram functions rightly, functions telepathically when fully and rightly organized. And that means, of course, that we're on our way to do that. We're on our way to do that when we're working in the groups affiliated, even if peripherally, such as DK's groups were, even if peripherally associated with an ashram. We're learning the technique, and so in our spiritual diary, we record, as he says here, any telepathic happening between you and your fellow disciples. There's quite a few of these things that can go into the spiritual diary, we note. And then number 4, the Tibetan says, any phenomenon of a mystical and spiritual kind should also be noted. Phenomena, well, I suppose this can also occur within the personality, but prompted or initiated from above. And then he tells us that the seeing of the light in the head comes under this category. And let me say that we remember that when the time for a more externalized initiation process arrives, and I suppose this means especially the first initiation, those who will look on at the candidate and will see a sufficient light demonstration to convince them that this candidate warrants initiation. Maybe this will also apply more subjectively to the second initiation, which will also be to a degree externalized. So the seeing, sorry, the seeing of the light in the head comes under this category. Its brilliance should be noted, the Tibetan says, its growth and dimming. The hearing of the voice of the silence, which is the voice of the soul, but not of the subconscious. And right here, let me say, that's really an important distinction. Many people hear voices, and maybe they imagine it's God or the soul or something, but it's their very own subconscious which is speaking, from which the majority of channeled writings arise, and therefore they are not of much value. I did mention that the Eastern student is still more sensitive, so if 96%, I think that's the figure he gives, of the channeled writings arise from the subconscious, and the Eastern student is still more sensitive to real communications. There's 4% left. It doesn't leave a whole lot for the ambitious Western student who imagines somehow that he is channeling the voice of the soul. It's a hard lesson, and many channelers would be quite disappointed if they realized the truth of Master DK's factual estimation of what they are receiving. But then again, you know, they insulate themselves against such thoughts, which they view as criticism of a holy internal process, HOLY, and they persist in their glamour and illusion. So many are the pitfalls, my friends, and they are pitfalls which might seem quite real until one studies scientifically what is really going on. And then one has to have the detachment to let go of the kind of glamorous, illusory psychism, which doesn't really lead to spiritual results. Also included here, the Tibetan goes on, in this category of mystical and spiritual impressions, the registering of messages from the soul or from other disciples and world servers. Also, going on, expansions of consciousness, which initiate you into the conscious life of God as it manifests through any forms, and the hearing of the note of all beings. Now, let me say that these are more advanced registrations. And our work with the presence, which is pure being, I would think would come in this category. And the note of all things, well, that's very, of all beings, that's very advanced. But then who knows what may impress us? And we have to be ready to concretize it in writing, because it stabilizes. To do so stabilizes the impression. A close study, he says, of the third part of the light of the soul, that is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, will indicate the type of phenomena which should find its place in this diary. Now, let me say, is this not that section of the book which the masters themselves study? So many, then, are the unfoldments possible, and noting them, one's own description of them, when they occurred, will perhaps stabilize the road to repeated occurrence and make such impressions more frequently a part of one's consciousness than if one just said, dismissed them and didn't pay, much attention. Okay, what else in this spiritual diary? What else? Any experiences of a psychic kind which do not come under any of the above headings. Well, let me say that we have to be very alert, because the variety of possible impressions is considerable, and oftentimes they arrive suddenly and in a surprising manner. Those mentioned above come under the heading of the higher psychism, says DK, and concern the higher psychic faculties, spiritual perception, intuitive knowledge, mental telepathy, and not the telepathy which is based upon the solar plexus activity. I think, didn't I mention that even the lower products of lower psychism should be noted, how they arose, when they arose, what they were accompanied by, all that. He goes on to say, the lower psychic experiences can also be noted, whether pleasant or unpleasant. Let me say that I'm sure we've all had experiences with unpleasant lower psychic registrations, even if we're not really a practicing psychic. But this is important about these lower psychic experiences. Once noted, he says, once noted, however, they should be forgotten, because for they are of no moment, no real significance. So in our spiritual diary, we have any spiritual experiences that may come to us as part of the higher psychism, the solar angel, the angel of the presence, the human soul on its own plane, etc. And I'm just going to make this a little more definite. So that's one, any illumination which may come to you. We have to be on the outlook, sensitive, alert, open to many more things that are happening than we usually give credit for happening. Then the third, any telepathic happenings between you and your fellow disciples. And the fourth, any phenomena of a mystical or spiritual kind should also be noted. And then any experiences of a psychic kind which do not come under any of the above headings. It is important, isn't it, that he mention, or that he tell us, that the kinds of experiences in 1, 2, 3, 4 come under the heading of higher psychism and concern the higher psychic faculties, spiritual perception, intuitive knowledge, mental telepathy, and not solar plexus telepathy. Okay, so let me say, I don't know if that's going to inspire us to keep a spiritual diary. It is recommended in the training. But then the training we are involved in right now, at least in my opinion, is not quite so intense. Not at all, as the training that the students received when Alice Bailey was alive and when the Tibetan was working with her, and directly supervising these ingathered chelas, we've had a little bit of an hiatus in that kind of work. Now, whether when the third installment begins at some point there will be a resumption of that kind of training, we don't know. But at one point, there will be. At one point. So let's go on. He's mentioned 5 categories he would recommend for inclusion in our spiritual diary. And this is relevant. Days may go by and weeks with no record. Let this in no way disconcert you. And I will say, one should not try to manufacture some kind of experience simply because it would make one think that there had been progress. No, we maintain the scientific agnostic point of view, and that which arises we note, but we do not force any arising. He goes on. The sensitivity of the mechanism of the soul to spiritual vibration has to be cultivated. And existing sensitivity to lower psychic impressions has to be tuned out. Well, it's a change, isn't it? In that which, awareness of that which may impress us. We can be sure that in the life of a master, there are so many more subtle impressions that impinge beyond anything that we, at our present stage, might register. So cultivation and tuning out of this ordinary psychism, which has been with the human race for so very long, and as I said, even has been part of the consciousness of the animals, some of them. DK goes on, so many voices clamor for attention, so many impressions. Let me say, it kind of reminds you of walking through that dark tunnel in one of the old commentaries, on the way to facing the rosy cross and overturning it. The experiences there can be similar. A lot of voices. As he says, so many impressions. And then he says, emanating from the physical and astral forms around us, register upon our consciousness. So many register upon our consciousness that the vibrations and sounds coming from the subjective and spiritual world are lost and not registered or recorded. Well, one is the more gross is preventing the registration of that which is finer in quality. And right there, let's say that's where the purification of all the vehicles, including the physical, comes into the picture. We do have to refine our instrument if we're going to receive the subtler impressions. He goes on and says, you will find it interesting to note at the end of a few years the difference in the data recorded and the development of sensitivity to the right kind of impression. Okay, so let us say that the spiritual diary has a real purpose, and it's part of our training in sensitization to impression, higher impression. So he says, at the end of a few years, you'll notice the difference in the data recorded and the development of sensitivity to the right kind of impression. Let me ask, do we know if we are receiving the so-called right kind of impression? Surely at the beginning, not as much as later. We have to become good judges of what is of high quality and what is very ordinary and doesn't lead anywhere. Well, he goes on to say, this can only be realized after much time has elapsed and much spurious material has been eliminated. Let me say that's false, counterfeit, useless material that's just part of the world glamour and illusion in which the majority of humanity seems habitually to live. So, after much time has elapsed, yes, there is the realization, and much spurious material has been eliminated after being recognized for what it is. Astralism, spurious claims, which I would say false, counterfeit, inauthentic claims, and thought forms. Yeah. So we become wiser in these matters. Through our experience and through our disciplined awareness that records scientifically, objectively, and without exaggeration or minimization what is actually happening in our inner life. It's part of objectifying our inner life. Now, DK goes on to another question. He says, another question might here be asked. What should disciples in a master's group look for as evidence of successful group work? Because, of course, we don't want to be led astray, and we don't want to think that we are achieving success when we're not really. So we're looking for the authentic criteria by which we might be able to judge whether there is progress. So DK goes on to say, first and foremost, as you well know, group integrity and cohesion. There is a secondary law called the law of cohesion. It's a systemic law. And so many groups end up falling apart at some place along their trajectory because their integration, their integrity is not strong enough. Group integrity and cohesion. DK goes on, nothing can be done without this. The subjective linking of the disciples with each other in their own group, and the linking of the group with other groups occupied with special work within the ashram, and the emergence as a result of this of group and ashramic consciousness are vital objectives. Well, let me say that if a group is always on the verge of splitting up or falling apart, or if the separative thoughts and actions of the group challenge its integrity, its cohesion, you will have a much compromised group. And also, he's telling us that this subjective linking of disciples is a sign of success. And the linking of the group with other groups, that is a sign of success. And the gradual onset of a group and an ashramic consciousness. What are we told earlier? That an ashram is the state of mind of a spiritual group. So these are what he calls the some vital objectives. And he goes on to say, it is hoped that this will also eventuate in a telepathic interplay, which will bring potent results and success. And I look at this in terms of group results and group success, which is the issue of real moments. Yeah, I can see where we have to go. And what I see is a slight change in the text, part of which got erased. And it's right here where it says page 16. These are all vital objectives that we've been talking about. And then what DK says, it is hoped that this will also eventuate in a telepathic interplay, which will bring potent results and successful outer work. That's the part that was missing. Surely, let me say that DK planned for his gathered groups successful outer work, but many things interfered. Perhaps their own lack of realization of what was the potential of what was being offered to them, but also World War II, which apparently could not be forestalled, given the inadequate attention to the principle of goodwill during the years when something might have been done to prevent the precipitation of that war on the physical plane. It would have raged psychologically, yes, of course, because humanity had many adjustments to make, and hierarchy had been having successes which were attacked by the counterforce, because these successes were growing too strong for their liking. So anyway, repeating here, it is hoped that this will also eventuate in a telepathic interplay, which will bring potent results and successful outer work. Let me say that we have not run the course yet, and we look forward in the early part of the Aquarian age to these potent results and successful outer work. DK goes on. From these activities will emerge a group circulation of energy which will be of service in world salvage. And of course, after such a war, humanity would need very much the saving force. So many objectives are there of a high kind. Integrity of the group, cohesion of the group, linking of the group with other groups. The occupation of the group with the special work which the ashram is trying to accomplish, and the emergence eventually of ashramic consciousness, of a group and an ashramic consciousness. And finally, the telepathic interplay. Leading to world salvage, and still today, there are so many selfish motives and selfish types that we do need to continue to pursue our path towards world salvage. DK goes on, each of you should remember that purity of body, let's say that purity comes out of Shambhala, we know, purity, destruction, and organization, that purity of body, control of the emotions, and stability of mind are fundamental necessities and should be daily the attempted achievement. And I wonder how many of us have risen to the necessary level in these processes. DK goes on to say again and again, I come back to these prime character requirements, and tiresome as reiteration may be, I urge you, upon you, the cultivation of these qualities: purity of body, control of the emotions, and stability of mind. We've all seen violations of all three, and usually all three go together. When you make progress in one, you often make progress in the others. So he's urging upon us the cultivation of these prime character requirements. I would say that we forget at our peril that the whole edifice of successful occultism is based upon, built upon these character requirements. And DK goes on to say, I would like to remind you also that you are adult and mature men and women and need not specific statements as to faults and characteristics. Now, let me say that at times, Master DK had to give such specific statements. It seemed that the disciple was obtuse, was not noticing his or her own condition. And then he would zero in and help that disciple analyze the situation. And then again, DK repeats, I seek only to make suggestion as to trends of thought. Note here the word suggestion. For that is all I seek to give. Now, Master Moria talked about the power of suggestion. It's no small thing. It's not weak or vacuous coming from a master. It can be mighty in its effect. DK goes on, the disciple must be left free to follow a suggestion or a hint as seems wise to him. This principle of freedom is permeating everything that he does. He's just not forcing compliance. And when you encounter those that say they are teaching and they force you to comply, you'll know that something is wanting. This entire work, he says, might be termed an experiment in esoteric common sense. Well, there is the esoteric sense. It is the seventh sense, and then there's the common sense. It is the sixth sense. So some blending of the two is here indicated. And he goes on, in willingness to accept suggestion. It's interesting how the master has to restrain himself against being too heavy-handed. He knows that he knows, and he knows what will affect his Shela for the good, but he holds himself because it's against the law to command, to demand. And moreover, it is a second-ray way of working. He goes on. This work to which I have called you is also an experiment. How often that word appears. An experiment in impersonality, in willingness to work and learn, in freedom to choose or reject, in observation and in techniques. All have their value. So we realize that a very productive state of affairs is operative at this time. That word experiment. It means that the master, well, maybe the disciple, maybe both, hold loosely to the results. And, well, there's an old saying, work without attachment to results. I think that's a very difficult thing to do, because naturally we do something very much for the results that it will achieve. And if we see those results just not work out, we have to learn the reason without obsessing over the fact that they did not work out. So he does go on and say something maybe that will surprise someone. Yeah. This is an experiment, likewise for me. So, the willingness to undertake processes that look like they could be productive, but not to remain attached to the results. This is the way a master and higher initiates learn to work. This is an experiment. Likewise for me, he says. I have worked hitherto with only 3 Occidental chelas. This seems to imply that he has worked with Oriental chelas. 3 Occidental chelas, of whom AAB is 1. Now, something peculiar is said here. The other 2 are totally unknown to any of you. Well, did he not help H.P. Blavatsky? And did he not give her much material? And could she have been one of the other 2? She wouldn't have been unknown to us, would she? So it's beginning to look like someone else. We don't know, and we don't know the the time period in which that work with the 2 other chelas occurred. He says, I ask for your aid and cooperation during these early stages of the work, as far as the reaching of conclusions is concerned. So let me say he's advising them not too rapidly to jump to conclusions regarding the value of the work they are assigned or asked to do. He goes on and says, I ask you to stand together, no matter what eventuates or what forces may seek to separate you. Well, that's a watchword. This cohesiveness, this integration must not be broken. I ask my disciples to love each other in spite of character and ray differences, and to work loyally together for group coherence and integrity. We do see how the loyalty associated with the second ray is here being invoked. Anyway, to work loyally together for group coherence and integrity. No matter what diverse opinions you may hold or what may occur as time elapses. And then the promise, if you can hold together down the years and throughout this life cycle. So here, let's say that maybe at this point, DK was looking for this project, this experiment, to last longer than it did. Repeating then, if you can hold together down the years and throughout this life cycle, then the group can carry forward into the future and work together on other planes, thus conserving energy. He let me say, has a deep concern about the amount of energy required to do this work and to be in touch with these students. Well, he's asking the questions. Can you persist and carry on? Now, there's a big one right there. Because you can be sure that things will come up which are the result of working with a personality in form. Many did not persist and did not carry on. Can such a telepathic interplay, he asks, be set up that the barrier of death will eventually prove no barrier at all, and the continuity of communication persist? Well, he does ask us to treat the group workers who have passed on not differently than those who are in the body. He alerts us to their activity within the ashram. He particularly does that in Discipleship Volume 2. And he says, treat them ongoingly, very much as if they were members of the group. So DK goes on. many such questions arise, and time alone will give the answer. If there is persistence in effort, if there is the loyal link of love, not betraying in ways small or large our co-workers going on, if there is adherence to the group ideal, and if there is mutual forbearance and understanding and patience. And let me say that all of these requirements are not necessarily ones that every one of us possesses in large measure. So if these things are true, then, he says, it may be possible that this group can be welded into a unit, which will indeed be a living atom in the hierarchical body. Well, we don't know what DK did with the members of this group. Probably many of them continue to live normal lives and passed over and etc. But that the acme of group work had already been reached. Now he says, you are all on the path of discipleship at some stage or another. In this lies opportunity, just as okay. Looks like I'd like to say I was just going into meditation deep, but to plow on and to persist, sometimes a wave of fatigue comes over me, and I just have to admit it. Well, but we do have one more paragraph. DK says, this is a body, small indeed, of disciples who, through devotion to truth, through their attempt to do their duty, and their mutual karmic relation, both to each other and to me, have been chosen in spite of limitations and faulty development to work together towards the specific end of forming a nucleus of spiritual power and energy for the helping of humanity. Now, I suspect that a number of us will be similarly engaged in the future under Master DK, some of us, as an externalizing master. It's kind of an ideal statement, isn't it? But these disciples do seem to have devotions to truth. The attempt to do their duty. And of course, that interesting mutual karmic relation to each other and to the master. So they were chosen, despite the fact that their limitations were there and maybe sometimes significant, and their development was often faulty. Why would they be there if there were no occasion to improve on their development? But the promise is very strong. They could form a nucleus of spiritual power and energy for the helping of humanity. And he goes on, but above all else, it is a group formed to inaugurate the methods of the new age as regards group work and the training of disciples and their preparation for initiation, along with other groups all over the world who have caught the new vision and are working under the inspiration and impression of the masters. It's at times like this that I wish I were indeed using my color coding methods and word enlargement and so forth, but various circumstances militate against that. A group formed, are our groups thus, a group formed to inaugurate the methods of the new age as regards group work, the training of disciples, and their preparation for initiation. Every true disciple is being prepared for the next initiation, whatever that is. And DK is careful to decentralize us, telling us there are groups all over the world who act similarly and have caught the new vision and are being inspired by the masters. Going on, the foundation of these schools of the mysteries, which will later be restored to the world, and to which I referred in Letters on Occult Meditation, let me say right around page 299 and following, may be possible if you measure up to opportunity. Well, nothing's certain here, right? Nothing completely certain. This should be borne in mind, he says. The experiment may fail. Of course, let me say there's more time to bring it into the state of success. But in terms of what could be accomplished at that time, it seemed to fall a little short. So indeed, the experiment may fail. whether it does or not, real profit will in any case eventuate. And there's one of those ellipses indicating an extraction. And then a wind-up statement that you may one and all measure up to the opportunity and carry the work forward in the three worlds and in the kingdom where the light of the soul streams forth is my earnest wish and desire. How often, may I say, he does give a kind of exhortation at the end. He is a good example of the fact that the masters work through the factor of inspiration. So we've gotten as far as page 17, and maybe I can 13 to 17. That's how far we've gone on this July 9th. And maybe I should be a little more conservative and simply say, look, I have good intentions. I want to do more today, but there is this presentation on glamour. And as a result, the probability is that I won't get to another program, though I would like to. My own energy comes and goes as I'm working here with you. So this has been the end of program number 9, and it's been from page 13 to 17, and the day has been July 9th. And program number 10 is coming up. And but let's be conservative and put XX. And we'll go from page 17 to wherever. XX, however, will be the day of start. And maybe, who knows, maybe it will be this evening. Well, a lot of ground covered. The spiritual diary, of course, and the invocation of persistence, and the whole idea of group experimentation, and the idea of the experiment in esoteric common sense and in the willingness to accept suggestion, the need for purification in order to receive input from the higher psychism, but not entirely ignoring the lower, and the need for honesty, a scientific agnostic attitude that does not force events worthy of the spiritual diary to have happened. Yeah, all these things are to be added. So, I think that's going to be enough for right now, so that I can be ready for the broadcast on glamour, which is rife in the world, is it not? And we're almost to that point where, well, anyway, page 17 begins, but we're near page 18. Well, friends, I persist. Occasionally walk, in that middle land between impression and production. Something sweeps over me and I'm gone for a few minutes or a few seconds anyway. But I hope to persist with you and that this can be of value for you. We still have maybe another, I don't know, 50 pages in this section. I do believe that will be the case. When I go through it this way, it looks like a lot more. And difficult to know when it, but it goes up to page 102 or so. And we're only on page 17, so we've got 85 pages. That's still a lot of learning to be done. Okay, friends, many blessings, lots of love from Tuya and me and BL and Joe and Michael and the whole communications team, trying to bring you the ageless wisdom in a form that will be useful to you and easily, well, never easily, but more easily assimilated. We'll be seeing you soon. And bye-bye for now.